Hello and welcome to every Lizardmen Lord ranked from worst to best. If you're not aware, this series of videos is leading up to me ranking every single legendary lord in Warhammer 2 from worst to best. So if you'd like to see that, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. First, I'll go over the rules and criteria. I'm going to be focusing on the campaign rather than multiplayer, because that's kind of my thing, and also anyone can make anything work in multiplayer. I'm going to be taking into account everything I can that is specific to this lord and faction. This includes the unique effects they bring to their faction, the effects they have on their army, and of course the lord themselves and their performance in battle. Let's preface this video by saying that all of these rankings are based on my opinions and are not any facts. If you have a different ranking to mine, then be sure to leave it down in the comments. But first, time is running out to get 10% off your order on the COLONELDAMNEDERS merch store. Today is your last day you can use the code SEXYROM to get 10% off your order at checkout, so pick something up while you can. If you've ever wanted to pick up a bit of merch, be it the brand new, the thickest one, or the classic logo, then there's never been a better time to do it. All purchases on the store go directly towards supporting the channel, and I can't thank anyone that buys anything enough. So if you're interested, head on over to COLONELDAMNEDERS.store to check out everything. Also, if you do buy anything, be sure to take some pictures and tag me on Instagram and Twitter. I'd love to see them. I'll now return you to your regularly scheduled ranking. Without further ado, let's get into the ranking, starting in 6th place. Is it really any surprise to anyone that it's Nakai the Wanderer? His faction starts at Albion, and to God, I have but one question. Why? This is even worse now that Rakaf is in the game, because he will hunt you down so fast and it is so sad. He's also a Horde faction, but has a weird mechanic where everyone recruits from Nakai, so it is marginally better than the standard Horde. But it's still a Horde, so it kinda sucks. The vassal faction you give settlements to are a waste of life and do nothing useful and can barely hold on to the settlements. The bonuses from getting lots of favour can be strong, but good luck getting to them because everything else blows. Aside from this, the only other faction effect that Nakai brings is +3 recruit rank for KROAK Ancients. As for his personal army, he grants +5 melee defense and -10 recruitment cost for KROAK and Sacred KROAK. And that's it. And for his starter units, he gains Sacred KROAK and regular KROAK, both of which are excellent monster units used to support your army. Now, Nakai himself is basically a massive KROAK himself, so he's extremely tough and also has very high damage. He also has relatively decent speed for a footlord and a lot of mass, so he's very hard to knock around, but can also knock around enemies pretty easily. He of course has no mounts, and with all his items and abilities, he debuffs nearby enemies and buffs allies with perfect vigor, which is pretty incredible to be honest. Now the reason for his rank being so low stems from the fact that he is a Horde faction. Yes, he's a better version of a Horde faction, but he is still a Horde faction. In Vortex, he may not be so bad, but in Mortal Empires, he is terrible. The starting location is the biggest head scratch in the world. Why is it Albion? And now with Rakaf there, it's even worse. Also, for a Horde faction, he cannot raid, so he can't make any money unless it's from the vassal or battling. And as I mentioned, the vassal really is useless and struggles to defend itself against anything. Coming in 5th place, we have Teeny Weeny to Halloween. His faction starts centrally in Lustria, which is nearby to most of the other Lizardmen, so he can get a lot of alliances in the works fast. Unfortunately, this is also in the middle of that royal rumble called Lustria, so it is quite the pain. All the non-Lizardmen factions will be attacking you fairly quick, and it's not very fun. He also has +200% upkeep for SAURUS units until getting to stage 1 of the Prophecy of Sotek, and this takes some time, which means you'll either have no gold or have to use no SAURUS units, which is a massive handicap. The sacrifices to Sotek do offer some nice bonuses using battle captives, but it's not enough to make the initial challenge here any less painful. Finally, he also gets a -75% to the Rite of Sotek cost. For his personal army, he grants 10% physical resist for skink units, +10 leadership when fighting Skaven, and 3 untainted locally. For his starting army, he gains the Salamander Hunting Pack, which are an excellent armor-piercing missiles unit, a Bastildon Ark of Sotek, which is a fantastic dinosaur artillery unit, and red-crested skinks, which are armor-piercing but quite squishy melee infantry. Tenowin himself is a decent skink fighter with surprisingly high armor and weapon damage. He also has access to Lore of Beasts, which isn't my favourite lore, but a fighter that can cast magic is very nice. He can get a mount of each size of dino, but the king is the engine of the god Stegodon, both for its melee damage and incredible ability value. With all his items and abilities, he can greatly buff himself and nearby units with poison attacks, which is pretty damn powerful. Now the reason for his rank is pretty much down to that start. It's a shame he has to be so low because he really does have the potential to be great. There are just too many roadblocks in the way of that greatness. The central start in Lustria, where he gets attacked by the Vampire Coast, a load of Skaven factions, and Marcus Wolfheart at the very least, just mean that his start is so painful. Add on top of this that it's nearly impossible for him to recruit any SAURUS units early on without crippling his economy, means he's stuck with skink units, and even with the physical resistance, they are not too great by themselves. On top of this, he can be a very powerful fighter on that engine of the god Stegodon. It just takes him so damn long to get there, and chance that you'll die before you do. Coming in 4th place, we have Noughts and Crosses, Tic Tac Toe. His faction starts in the west of the desert with some mountains and Arkan the Black standing in between him and the rest of Lustria. His starting battle versus the Empire subfaction can be a little troublesome since their default starting army is stronger than his default starting army. Now this guy loves him some Pterodons. Skink heroes get them as mounts for free, and all of them in the faction get an improved death from above ability. The faction also gets a unique right that allows you to double your move range at any one turn, and it is pretty cool for zooming across the map. Tic Tac's personal army gets minus 50% upkeep for Pterodon and Ripidactyl rider units, and 10 melee attack when in foreign territory. For starter units, he gains Pterodon riders with Fire Leech bollards, which are excellent flying anti-infantry ranged units, Skink skirmishers, which are your early game skirmishing units, and Cold One riders, which are your standard Lizardmen dinosaur cavalry. Tic-Tac-Toe is always on his Ripidactyl, so has great speed and charge bonus. His melee stats are actually okay to save such large targets, and the damage is pretty good armor piercing. He doesn't have a lot of armor, but the 20% physical resist makes him deceptively tough. And with all his items and abilities, he can buff himself and other flying units in a number of ways, both defensive and offensive. Now the reason for his rank is that he has a slightly better starting location than KROAK, as he can migrate over to Lustria, but it's still fairly painful being in the desert with not many allies nearby. The faction focus on flying is unique, but I wouldn't say it's great, as flying units still have the same weaknesses no matter how much he buffs them. The ability to double the move range of everything in the faction is really strong, but it's still more of a time saver than something extremely powerful. As a fighter, he is pretty decent, but again, he's just a large flying target, so can be pinned down in melee or shot to pieces from range just like anything else. Taking our third place today, we have KROAK. His faction starts in the southeast corner of the map, quite near to the desert, which means he's a long way from any main lizard allies. He does start fighting the Skaven, though it isn't a major Skaven faction, so it's not too bad. He has quite a number of enemies and quite a lot of land standing between him and Lustria, so if you ever want to get any friends, confederations or alliances, it's going to take a while. Now his faction mechanic is just one thing, minus 10% upkeep for all units, which is nice, but it's just one thing. As for his personal army, he grants 50% upkeep reduction for his Saurus and Cold One units, plus 25% to ambush chance, and plus 20 armor and 10 leadership for Stegodon, Bastillodon, Pterodon, Ripidactyl, Carnosaur and Dreadsaurin units, and 10 leadership for all units. For his starting units, he gains Cold One Spear Riders, which are your shock dinosaur cavalry, a Feral Stegodon, which is a fantastic early game monster unit, and some Saurus Spears, which are your standard spearman infantry. As for KROAK himself, he is heavily armored and does massive armor piercing with a bonus versus large. He has no spells, so is limited to just being a simple footlord. He does also have very decent mounts, but the best one by far is Grimlock, his unique Carnosaur. With all his abilities and items, he gains a lot of damage and busts himself in combat. Now the reason for his rank is that he does have a truly tough starting location miles away from any of his friends, so if he gets picked on, he's done. His faction effects, while nice, are rather basic, and once you get to the endgame, while 10% upkeep is a lot of money to save, it is a drop in the ocean of coin that you undoubtedly have at that point. Now he is a strong fighter, but the roster is filled with strong fighters, so he needs to offer something more than that to compete. His army effects, however, are very, very good for buffing the units that will be carrying your battles. Between him and Tic-Tac-Toe, it could have gone either way, but I personally went with KROAK because I just believe his playstyle is a little bit easier. Now, coming in second place, we have the thick one himself, Mazdamundi. His faction starts in the top end of Lustria, and you have to fight to move in pretty much any direction, though once you get south enough, the other lizards will be very happy to see you. He gets minus 10 relations with most factions that aren't lizards, minus 50% to construction costs for star chamber buildings, and minus 30% to right costs. These faction effects are pretty mediocre, to be honest with you, and if he was in a worse starting location, he'd definitely be a lot further down the list. For his personal army, he gains minus 50% to miscast chance, 50 XP per turn for his entire army, plus 40 to the Winds of Magic Reserve, and minus 50% upkeep for Temple Guard. His starting units are the Feral Bastillodon, which is a fantastic monster for the early game, some KROAK Scores, which are a nice support monstrous infantry, and Temple Guard, which are your endgame melee infantry. As for Mazdamundi himself, he's a powerful spellcaster with access to a mix of laws. He has okay damage and magical attacks, but not much armor, and a massive hitbox makes him lose a ton of survivability. However, with his mount, he gains a lot of power. Zlark does a ton of damage and brings even more health and a lot of armor, so you want to get him on this as soon as possible. With all items and abilities, he brings a tremendous amount of buffs and ways to do damage outside of the traditional fighting. The reason for his rank being so high is his starting location mainly. It goes from quite rough to extremely easy once you make contact with the rest of Lustria. You get easy alliances and confederations without even having to go down into that Royal Rumble. The army buffs allow Mazdamundi to support his army from the back lines with a massive amount of spells with little chance of miscasting, and passive XP per turn is always a win. While Maz may be a bit of a basic spellcaster right out the gate, he does eventually become a very powerful fighter as well, and unlike Tahenowin, he can actually get to that point. Coming in first place, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, is KROAK. First of all, his faction starts in Itza, which is nearby to many of the lizard allies in Lustria. The starting war versus Skrolk would be tough if only you weren't so strong. Oh, and did I mention that they start in control of Lord Goddamn KROAK, which makes early battles a breeze, and late battles a breeze, and every battle a breeze because Lord KROAK is fantastic. He also gains reduced upkeep to SAURUS units, which are the heart of your army and expensive in the early game, so this kind of negates that. They also get a unique right that makes SAURUS warriors even stronger, and also +3 recruit rank for SAURUS Scar veterans. For Golrok's army, he adds +5 to melee defense when in own friendly territory for all units, and 20% physical resistance when defending sieges. For his starter units, he gains Skink Javelins, which are your early game missiles units, and SAURUS Warriors with Shields, which are your early game infantry units, and SAURUS Spears with Shields, which are your early game spears units. Golrok himself in battle is an unbelievably strong battler for a simple footlord. He has massive armor and massive damage with resistances and high leadership, so he really can be a one-man army. He does have no mounts, so will always be limited in speed, and with all his abilities and items, he gains buffs to himself to make himself even tougher, do more damage, and buff other units near him with things such as 60 armor and unbreakable. So the reason for him being ranked first is that he has a fairly central Lustria location, so easy contact with the rest of the local lizards for allies and confederations. Starting with Lord KROAK is such a slap in the face to the other Lizardmen factions that I can't actually believe that they thought it was okay. The reduction in cost of SAURUS units is insanity, as their entire balance is based around them being expensive. Add the unique right that buffs them, and you really have no need for Temple Guard. On top of this, Golrok himself, being such a tanky powerhouse, is really the cherry on top of such a stupidly powerful faction. And that concludes this video on ranking every single Lizardmen Legendary Lord from worst to best. If you'd like to see all the Legendary Lords in all of Warhammer 2 ranked from worst to best, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular Kobe Said So, for his ridiculous amounts of support to the channel. I really can't thank him enough. One more time, thank you very much for watching, and for now, I've been Colonel Damneders, and I will see you next turn.